How many podcasts do you come across that have the balls to open up and let everything out there? And not only that, but let you say what you want to say. Well, that's why we're here. This is Truth, Lies, and Political Bullshit. An open forum where you're part of the show. Real, raw, and nothing is off limits. And we do mean nothing. So light it up and let's set this bitch on fire. Truth, lies, and political bullshit. And now your host, Sean Morse.
Sweeney, Sean Morse from Truth, Lies, and Political Bullshit. How you doing, buddy?
I'm good, Sean. Good to join you.
Hey, thanks for joining me. Hey, listen, I just want to tell everybody, in any podcast, there's always technical difficulties. And the reality is you got $2 million in the bank and you got a $25 computer. And it took us 3 tries to get this podcast up and running. But, man, we got it going. And I really appreciate you just working with me to get it up. So how you doing, buddy?
The latter part of your statement is true. The former, the $2 million in the bank, I wish.
Oh, I forgot. Your ex-wife is probably listening. You're as broke as can be. Look at his computer.
No, beyond that, I'm like the only politician who came into office poor and left office poor. Pelosi and the rest of them all went in, and made more money. Obama, the whole crew.
I was going to ask you if you'd take us over to your refrigerator and see you had $25 ice cream in there. But yeah. I'm sure you got the Stewart's ice cream, right?
Yeah, I had the Stewart's and I ate plenty of it, as you can tell.
Well, hey, listen, you look like you're hanging in there, and I really appreciate you being here. Just a little quick background, John. I mean, you're born and raised in Troy, New York. Not a very big city, just about 86,000 people at the time you were a kid. You jumped over here to the Democratic city of Cohoes for a short time when you were working for Pataki, only because you could get down the highway in 5 minutes, right?
That was true.
And you were probably sleeping in a little late, so you had to get up and kick ass.
No. You know what? It was late night budget negotiations that I always had to be there on.
Yeah, I was
deputy secretary. I was the number 2 guy. So.
Well, hey, look at the moral of the story is you come a small town kid, you grow up to be a congressman, and on the way there you end up working for Pataki, who wins a Republican governor's seat in the most democratic of cities. You become labor secretary. I'm sure that was a decent job. You were working with unions, and I tell you the truth, you probably don't remember me back then because, I was a lot younger. But I had conversations with you because I was the president of the firefighters union for my city. Yep. And we were always trying to figure out how to, get
Who could forget you?
Well, yeah, I was loud and boisterous and quite interesting, wasn't I?
No, you talk about the Pataki, and this is a political show. So I was one of 3 guys who helped create George Pataki.
Yeah.
And it was Bill Powers, Kieran Mahoney, and myself in a room in 1993 at the State Republican Committee, on a mid to late October day, rain pouring down, and we were passing around sheets of paper with the 7 or 8 categories or characteristics we thought we needed to find in a candidate to be competitive. We knew we were going to be competitive because we were winning races at the local level, but there were certain traits we were looking for, and George Pataki never was number 1 on anybody's list, but he was number 2 and number 3 a lot of times, and we did this for hours, and then finally we said, this guy keeps appearing on all these lists. He was a first-term state senator. Why don't we think about Pataki? So I placed a call to George. And he was in a Kiwanis meeting, giving a speech. And he had to go do his speech, and he was going to call me back. And at that time, he thought I was calling him to ask him if he was interested in running for comptroller. And I said, yeah, it's something like that. Can you make it it was a Friday evening or afternoon. I said, can you make it to Albany tomorrow? And so the story went. We called D'Amato up, who was then the U.S. Senator. And he said, and I'll imitate Alphonse. It was like, yeah, we wise guys, who do you got? And we said Pataki, and there was this pregnant pause. And he said, what the fuck is a Pataki?
Yeah.
And that was the true story. And by the end of the campaign, Al D'Amato had created him, according to Al D'Amato.
Well,
but it was funny. It was funny. It was a great ride.
Well, in Al's world, he created everything, didn't he?
Yeah, he really
Well,
did.
it was interesting because that's what I was leading up to. From a small town boy, growing up, becoming a lawyer, getting involved in the politics, you've made or helped make a lot of people. You were part of Newt's campaign to be speaker. You certainly were a major part of what I thought was one of the most ridiculous things in the world when you're talking about the United States of America, the most powerful country and the most powerful person, the president, being elected by a hanging Chad on some asshole's ballot with a bunch of people trying to figure out, is that a vote? Isn't that a vote? That a vote? How that shit happens in the United States, well, now it's even worse. But
Well, it's
that was really,
manipulation.
that was really the start of the manipulation of politics. And today it's 10 times. Now you can vote from, hey, listen, we had people who ran for mayor that voted 90 votes out of one apartment back in the day, right? So, but you
Well,
really,
I did the year before the year that we had that meeting in Bill's office. I was doing Giuliani's second campaign for mayor. He had lost the first campaign by about 80,000 votes, and there's a story to that as well. But I was doing his field operation, his street operation, and through the Victory program, which is a funding program through the state committee. But we had presence, and we had made, by the end of that campaign, voter integrity and ballot security a top issue. Now, the advantage we had then is we had control of the New York State Senate, so they would conduct hearings. We found tens of thousands of voters out of cemeteries or out of the same polling place. You can ask Fred Dicker, the reporter for the New York Post, because one of the strategies I used, because we knew that the Department of Justice was going to give us a hard time, was I implanted journalists, reporters, with our field teams. And that way they saw exactly the kind of shenanigans that were going on. But how that started is also an interesting story. I got a lot of interesting stories.
well, I'm sure we're going to get to them too, I hope.
We finished D'Amato's recount in '92 against Bob Abrams. And I went in to certify that, and I had used some pretty aggressive tactics. First of all, in some places in the boards of election in New York City, they really didn't see a real Republican for years. And then I show up from upstate New York. And this then executive director of the board, a Democrat employee by his name of Danny DeFrancisco, very rotund, very robust guy, smoked a cigar, looked like a mobster. I walked into his office on a Saturday afternoon. All the lights were off, and all he had on was the desk lamp. And two guys on either side of him who were big guys. And he said, "Kid, you did good for an upstater this time. But in '89, which was the first campaign of Giuliani, we stole 100.5. And you ain't getting away with that shit this time." Legitimately said that to me. I was shocked. I came out of the place trembling, and I went to a payphone because we didn't have any cell phones at the time. And I called Bill Powers up and told him that story, and he said, "Come home for Thanksgiving, and you're going to spend the next year in New York building a field operation." And that's what I did.
Well, I'll tell you, I'm sure that the Republican Party misses you because right now they're getting outflanked. They're getting outflanked because the Democrats have really become masters of manipulation and trying to harvest ballots. And back when I was running for office, you'd go out and get all of the absentee ballots. That's all there was. Today you can vote, you can stick it in your mailbox, you can stick it in a tree, you can stick it under a bush, somebody's going to pick it up.
Or frankly, you could manufacture it, and they've made it easier to cheat.
Yeah.
And they've in some respects, with some of their changes, have legalized cheating, and it's a shame, but the legislatures let a lot of that happen in New York. We're dominated by one party, and that's what you get. So, the integrity of these processes ought to be questioned, and it's a real threat to democracy. These phonies talk about the threats to democracy. That's the real threat.
Yeah, I agree.
The people's confidence in real elections.
The problem is that in this country, as great of a country as it is, that nobody votes. And so when you're trying to manipulate elections, you only got 2, 3, 4, 5% of the people, especially in like a primary, maybe 20% in a general election, right?
Right.
For the most people, they don't even give a shit. I used to get up on election day and think it was Christmas, and I'd be running around like an animal, and people would be just going about their business. I'd go by the American Legion; they're in there having a few beers. I'd go by the diner. Nobody gave a shit. If they didn't love you or like you or whatever, they would be like, "Who cares? It's election year." So it's easy to cheat when nobody's watching. The problem is the world is really changing, and it ain't changing for the better, right?
Right.
I mean, our liberties are being stolen. I mean, from your 401k into how we teach kids in schools today is all being decimated. And my prayer is that, the people of this great country will start, keeping an eye on what's going on. And that's really when elections become powerful, when the people are sick and tired of the bullshit, and they go out and vote. And if they don't do that,
one of those changes, in my opinion, is that the Democrat Party has veered so far left and become so entrenched with radicalism in many respects. Sean, my dad worked in Cluett Peabody in a factory in Troy, New York, cutting shirts, and he was a Truman Democrat. Harry Truman saved his life in his mind, because Harry Truman ended the war, which he was in the military, and they were preparing for the invasion of Japan, and my father was in the Merchant Marines, and they were going north, and he believed he won. There were 1 million people who were going to die. Anyway, I digress. He was a Truman Democrat, and by the end of his life, he became a Republican because the Democrats had veered so far left. I used to say, I saw my father cry 3 times in his life: when my mother died, when his mother died, and when John Kennedy died.
Yeah.
And those are true. That's true.
Yeah, that's
that's where I came from, and I became a Republican partly because of the policies of Ronald Reagan, and frankly, because I think I'm a contrarian anyway. And Democrats were so dominant in the state at the time when I was coming through the ranks in Rensselaer County that it was a natural home for me.
Yeah. Well, today's people our age took politics and government and voting really serious. Today, the world is really different, and all I can pray for is that there'll be a time when everybody recognizes they need to fucking wake up and get out there and vote. Otherwise, we're going to be in a lot of trouble. I mean, I look at the guy who's out there. I'm retired now, right? I look at the guy out there working today. His 401k's down 30%, gas is up 30%, mortgage rates are so high, young people can't buy a house. We don't have no more power to be the broker and the powerhouse of the world. People are jumping over the border. We're handing them money while we have people living under bridges in America that can't eat. I mean, we have kids going to school who are failing. They can't read. And what's the result of that? The result is policy, right? And so I was just looking at the paper and reading about the New York State. Here's a great thing, John. In New York State, the Department of Education is more concerned if you have the word Indian.
I saw that.
If you have Indian on your baseball team.
What's the name of your mascot versus how kids have fallen behind with the Chinese in terms of math and literature and history and writing and
well, we're down 5% in English, 8% in math. And here's how we address those problems. Instead of saying we have to figure out a way to better educate kids, we just say get rid of all those tests so that they can't take them, and then people will see that we're the stupidest period in the lifetime of our country. It ain't because we have stupid kids. We have smart kids who are put into stupid positions by these bureaucrats who could give a shit about them. That's the problem that we face in the world today. It's all about how do we stay in power? How do we get votes? What do we have to do it? And again,
Agree.
unless the people stand up, John, that's the way it's going to be. So politics and the world has changed since our days running for election. But I want to kind of switch over there because so you're out there working on some of the most important issues in the world. I'll go back to the hanging chads, right? Because one of the cool things about John Sweeney was his nickname. And I think about it all the time when I say John Sweeney, AKA the Kick-Ass Congressman. And I'm saying, man, how the hell do you get a name Kick-Ass Congressman? And I need you to just give me a quick synopsis of how do you become the Kick-Ass Congressman?
Geez, and everybody refers to it. You would think it would be an asset
Well,
going forward, but it's been more of a liability in that it made me a target and
yeah.
continued to be. George W. Bush, who was famous for giving people nicknames, nicknamed me Congressman Kick-Ass, and that was the result of the 2000 presidential election, Gore v. Bush recount. The story's rather long, but I'll try to abbreviate it. I get called by a guy named Don Evans, who was Bush's best friend and later became the Commerce Secretary in his administration, and asked to come to Florida because I had those prior experiences working in hostile places like New York City for a Republican, and making sure that we kept the cheating to a minimum. They're doing the recount. As you recall, the Democrats, the Gore people, had targeted a certain number of counties, and they were all jurisdictions with big cities in heavily Democratic areas. And they were specifically focused on Miami-Dade, where there were 15,000 what would have been in New York affidavit ballots, but were paper ballots that were filled out at the polling places by people who they couldn't validate or verify who they were. Those were the target because if they were able to flip enough of those votes, they would turn the election to Gore. And the Democrats knew that the mainstream media then would have crushed Bush out of the race. They just would have made it so impossible to stay in, especially with Bush, who we now realize is so sensitive to all that stuff. But Evans asked me to go down to Miami-Dade. And I said, I'm an elected official now. I had just gotten elected for the second time to Congress. I'm not an operative anymore. I can't really be doing this stuff. And he kept on me, and then Governor Bush got on the phone and implored that I do it for my country. So I packed for a couple of days and went down. Spent 3 weeks. Packed for 2 days, spent 3 weeks. And when I got to Miami-Dade, a guy named Ken Melman was quarterbacking the field recount for the Bush team. Ken later became the RNC chairman, but he was a nice guy who was a little soft around the edges when it came to the politics. He was not a confrontationalist. He was very good at data collection. In fact, we said at the time that I told Evans, who told Bush that it was going to be the best documented defeat since Vietnam. They had impeccable records of how they were losing every day. The more and more votes were slipping away from them. And when I tell you they were manufacturing the votes, they were manufacturing the votes. They would hold up a plain ballot that had no markings on it except lower ballot stuff and say, oh, that looks like a vote for Gore.
Yeah, there's no doubt.
And we were there to witness it, which is not something that happens today in recounts and in vote tabulation. So the Democrats learned an important lesson, and they learned that lesson at this event too. And we would challenge them, and we were building court records to go challenge them in court. One day, I happened to be, I think I was doing the Today Show or Good Morning America or one of them, and I'm driving back with a guy named Paul Gigot from the Wall Street Journal to the Miami-Dade voter Board of Elections. And one of my staff guys called me and said, you wouldn't believe what they just did. They just voted to move the count behind closed doors and limit any television access, because we had TV cameras on it, and limit our participation in watching them count it. And I said, you can't let them do it. And he said, well, what do you mean? Congressman, what do you mean we can't? I said, you got to stop them. And he said, we got to stop them. How? And I said, by any means. But every minute that you let them count, they'll steal.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the board had been made up of a Democrat judge who had been promised a federal judgeship, an independent who was appointed by the Democrats in Miami to be the director of the Board of Elections, and a Republican, really in name only, who was also a judge, who had been compromised by them, and we figured that out in the course of the time we were there, that they were essentially blackmailing her into voting with them. I had to sit her down and explain to her that we knew what they knew, and therefore she was going to lose either way. To do the right thing.
And that's American democracy, right?
Well,
that's blackmailing.
That's the bare knuckle effort that was underway. But I look at that experience. So I told my guys to shut it down. They did the Brooks Brother riot where they did a sit-in, and it was funny. The mainstream media was all with us until we were successful. And the minute the judges who realized that what they were doing was being portrayed very negatively in America, and we weren't going to allow them to do it. We're going to court, getting injunctive relief and things like that. They stopped the count because they realized the votes really weren't there, that they were manufacturing these votes.
Dirty votes.
And took a lot of heat for it since then, Sean. So that was where the Congressman Bush saw that. And then another interesting sidebar on that, I got a call from Karl Rove, who said, thank you, Congressman, for your help. You better leave the country. I said, what are you talking about? And he said, they're going to come after you with both barrels blasted.
Your ass they are.
They're going to, DOJ, which has been corrupted. This is the year 2000, 22 years ago. DOJ, was Government Integrity Unit, will be after you, and sure as hell, 8 years of their investigation later, I finally walked away from all of that crap. Yeah. But that's where Congressman Kick-Ass came from. Like I said,
you certainly did kick ass, John. There's
like I said, it was more of a liability than an asset because it brought in all sorts of outside money on my campaigns against me, and frankly, Republicans didn't necessarily rally around it.
Yeah, well, you have the Republicans who are jealous. You have the Democrats who want to kill you. And it makes it difficult, right? Because now you're a target. Because technically you become a rock star in the Republican Party. And so now you're down in Washington, D.C. You're a rock star. Everybody's talking about you. And I'm imagining you're living hard down there, right? I mean, the parties had to be incredible.
I wasn't sober then. Let me put it that way.
Right. The parties were heavy. I mean, come on. Tell me a little bit about some of those stories, John. Them parties.
I don't know if the statute of limitations is passed on some of this stuff.
May still have to hold off.
Yeah, one of the interesting little stories is that there was a local establishment near my apartment. I lived on the Senate side of Capitol Hill. And I was such a frequent customer. I used to hit there before I went home every night. That the owner and the manager of the place gave me a key to the side door because everything in Washington pretty much publicly closes down at noon or at midnight. Excuse me. And if sometimes you work late and you wanted to stop by and unwind a little bit. I used to invite over some of my colleagues, Democrats included. Because I was looking to cut deals all the time and make things move. We would go and have a few libations after hours and have some fun. Well, one night the Capitol Police came by in their car with those boom lights and there was a group of people in this restaurant at like 3 a.m, and they shined it in and rapped on the door. We're like, what the hell's going on? And I explained who I was and what we were doing, and the guy just shook his head and walked away. But we had a room full of members of Congress. We would have late nights, yeah.
Listen, everybody knows they can pretend they don't, but you get down in Washington, you're doing whatever business you're supposed to be doing for the people. Everybody knows mostly staff members are doing all the business, and you guys are just hitting it hard and rocking and rolling, and that's the reality.
I did a lot of my own work. I mean, I was a work hard, play hard guy.
Well,
I went through staff pretty aggressively, to be honest. because I demanded certain things from them. But where you really have the staff controlling things are the committees,
Yeah.
because those staffs remain intact. Members come and go and bring different people in, but the committees themselves, stay where they are, and their senior staff there could be there for decades.
Yeah.
And it was always a concern I had over the whole notion of term limits. I'm now somebody who favors term limits because I don't think there's any other way we're going to get some of these people out of office and have the kind of bad stuff that we've got now. But the worry was always that the staff would remain there, and they really would. The less experienced members you got, the more dependent on the staff that you would be, just as it related to rules and regulations of the House. And they would, they're like the unnamed and unseen bureaucrats of the executive branch. They would be the unnamed, unseen bureaucrats of the legislative branch, and they would control everything.
It's scary, right?
I used to have a saying in my office to my staff: no was not an option. It would be, I want to hear yes, we can do whatever the idea I had was, or we can't do it the way you want to do it, but here's the way we can do it, and legally do it. And I drove hard on that kind of stuff, because when you would go to the committees and ask whether it was enabling legislation or it was appropriations of some sort, and I was on the appropriations committee, the automatic response, usually, unless you were a very senior member, was no.
Yeah.
And I used to tell my staff, no is not an option. I don't want to hear it. So,
I mean, when you start having these conversations and talking to people like yourself, you really start to recognize that Congress, as well as other forms of government, whether it's local, state, county, whatever, they're almost like the good old country clubs. And there's a lot of country club shit going on there, right? And then there's a lot of games and a lot of manipulation and take care of this one and screw this one over. And it's kind of eye-opening to think that's how our government works in the greatest country in the world. There's let's have some drinks, let me get them shit-faced. We start talking about what's going on, and that's how the deals are brokered. But
well, it's old-fashioned politics.
It certainly is, man.
It's local politics. You got to get to know people.
It was like old-time union politics. You go to a hotel room with a bottle of scotch, and you don't leave till you get the contracts done. But
yeah, the hard thing about my career was that after 4 terms, I was really starting to take off.
Yeah.
I was developing seniority, and I was going to be a pretty dominant player. I was probably going to be a chairman of a committee, and then I lost, in part, obviously, my own fault.
Yeah.
But the real down part of that was I was going to be in a position to really make some moves. And I was known as a guy that was sort of get it done guy. Yeah. When people came to me with ideas, or if we proposed ideas out of the office, like I said, I wasn't taking no as an answer. I wanted to hear how it could happen, and happen obviously in a legal manner.
Well, you and I both know that the guy or the gal that fights their ass off to really get things done and becomes a champion for the people and starts moving up the ranks is the first guy that everybody's got the bullet aimed at their back, because you can only tell the truth so much, you can only buck the system so long, and people are jealous and they want to destroy you. And I think we both know that. And so,
I didn't have the pedigree, that was for sure.
Well, we both didn't have the political core.
And I was kind of a blue collar guy. That's why when I was labor commissioner, I had such success, because my dad had been a major union player, and I kind of understood the language.
Yeah, I worked with you. You did understand it. There's people after you that, or before you, I should say, that they were just a pain in the ass, and they didn't really care. They just had a nice, cushy political job, didn't know what the hell they were talking about, and had no relationships between the unions and the workers. You did have that relationship, but I want to just kind of go on and say, so now here you are. You start out here in your state politics. You get to the Congress. You become Congressman Kick-Ass. You're growing in popularity, seniority, strength, scaring a lot of people. And so that's when the shit starts falling, right? You start having people from these organizations, these good government organizations, saying, "Oh, he's taking trips and he's taking this he shouldn't be doing, and his wife's on the payroll, and look at this guy, he's corrupt and he's no good." The boilerplate typical, let's attack somebody because we don't know any other way to beat them but to attack them and lie about them and try to knock them down. And in the meantime, you're kind of living pretty hard, man. You're getting drunk a lot. You got some demons that are in your life with the alcohol, and I see things starting to unravel, right? And tell me a little bit about how that all came down on you, and you started to feel the effects of all of that pressure, all of these organizations.
Well, I mean, and not that this necessarily was the main factor, but the Department of Justice opened an investigation on me for taking a trip, and the trip was the trip I took to get out of the country after the Miami recount.
The one they told you to take.
To the Marianas Islands.
Yeah.
And they tried to draw a parallel or a connection between me and a guy named Jack Abramoff, who I never met in my life. I used to say I never met Jack Abramoff. I never took a dime from him. Mike McNulty, who was shared in the same district with me, took contributions with him and traveled with him. But he never got investigated, but that's neither here nor there. And they had been on my case because of that trip. They tried to say that I was brought to the Marianas Islands. I was brought to the Marianas Islands as the former labor commissioner who did sweatshop enforcement. At the time, there was a member from California named George Miller who was claiming that the Marianas Islands, which are a U.S. territory, were running sweatshops. And the government of the Marianas Islands asked me to come and look and see what they had. What their ask was that I either did a bill that recognized that they were not, or I made a speech from the floor of the House which said they were not. And I went and I did their tour, and I came back to the States, and they said, "Would you now do something tangible, something of substance that puts it on the record?" And I said, "No." I said, "I saw what you wanted to show me, but I did sweatshop enforcement in New York when I was labor commissioner, and we never busted an operation where we were pre-announced. We busted them all when we showed up as a surprise based on tips. So I don't feel comfortable doing that, and I'm not going to do it. And long and short is I didn't do it. At the end of 8 years, and it was subsequent to my losing and being out of office, that the Department of Justice finally sent that letter, even though statutes of limitations are supposed to be 5 years, by the way, but sent that letter that said you're no longer a target. Their big issue was my then wife, who was my ex-wife, who was working for a lobbying firm, Powers' lobbying firm in Albany, had bought a Christmas present pool table for me with the company credit card. And the claim was that it was a bribe, like my wife was bribing me, and the quid pro quo was I got money for Siena College. It was absurd.
Yeah, it's absurd.
It was absurd, and that's where it all came from. And the attacks were so gratuitous, but the Times Union, and then picked up by the local TV stations. Channel 6 was, they had a reporter try to do a gotcha interview of me that I just said, I'm not doing this with you. But that was a steady drumbeat of attack. The outside groups, George Soros had 7 groups, all of them were in against me at the end. In February of 2006, I had a 70% favorable, and I lost that election. So it just shows you.
Well, listen, I understand because, I went through a lot of the same stuff, right? Smaller level, but the same stuff. The federal government, when they're after you, they just put so much pressure on you that no matter what you do, every day you're just trying to figure out how to survive. They're breaking you financially. They have endless amounts of money. And, there's no system in place where it's equal amongst everybody, right? They just come after you and say you did this, even if 58 other people have done it. You look at that Congresswoman Omar there, who I think they say married her brother to get out of college debt. She raises a couple $1 million and she hires her brother or her husband, whoever the hell it is that she's married to now, and pays him all that money to be a consultant. It goes into their same checking account. They spend it just like it's their private money, and that's okay. That's fine. Nobody says a word. But if they're after you, they're after
the
you.
problem is what it's become in many respects is it's they target people in search of a crime, and that's not the way it's supposed to work.
And then they arrest you. They make up the crime, and then you have to defend yourself against a.
Well, in my case, they didn't arrest me. They leaked stories about how they were investigating me, and it certainly undermined your credibility and your support in many respects.
Because people
sooner or later go, where there's smoke, there's fire, right?
People either are sheep and believe everything they read or hear, or they get so tired of listening to it, they think just removing you makes it better for them. I mean, I watched them do it to Bobby Cigaracci. They decimated one of the greatest guys that I've ever met in my life, one of the best mayors the city ever seen, and they just did it because somebody didn't like him. He pissed somebody off somehow. I went through the same exact thing. It's crazy justice on behalf of the government against people who really didn't do anything, but that's what.
Well, you, Bob, and I kind of fit a mold.
You can't beat them. You can spend endless amounts of money, and then you just have to say, I quit. And you have to make those decisions because they'll just keep beating you down until you're living under the bridge. And then they'll give money to the people jumping the border, and you'll starve to death trying to catch a carp under the fucking.
Yeah, most of it I don't really care about. What I care about is my family.
Yeah, me too.
The effect on my family, especially my kids.
Yeah.
And that's the hard part. And the perpetuation of my alcoholism really was boosted by being in a position where nobody really was saying no to me. I'm sure my family was.
You're at the top of the heap.
I was inherent in it. The pressure that I was under and facing, and just the sort of escalation of years and years of that, abuse.
Yeah.
That finally, thank God I hit some bottom along the way. Most of it happened after I was in office, and that happened, and I now look back, I was resentful for it. I as you know, I did a short stretch in county jail as a deal that I made to keep my license, and a plea deal that allowed me to keep my law license so I could continue to make a living.
Yeah.
And they were making an example out of me. This is in Republican Saratoga County, too, by the way.
Yeah. I was a Democrat getting eaten by Democrats. So
yeah, right. So
if they don't like you, it doesn't matter. It is.
Right. But I'm not crying about it because I look at it now and say I wouldn't have got sober without it.
Yeah. Well, hey,
I needed to be punished like that.
The most important part is that you found sobriety, and and that supersedes and is far better than anything else that you could have ever done in your life, right? You'll be defined for a guy who was able to beat an ugly disease like addiction. So you should be really proud of that, John, and hats off to you because I'm proud
every day, one day at a time.
That's right, one day at a time. So, ironically, you got arrested for 2 DWIs. Is that what it was? 2?
Yeah.
And
it was no small coincidence that I'm out of office. I don't have people driving me around, and I'm not. I get 2 DWIs almost immediately. Bing, bing. But it's given my my mindset at the time. It's not a shock that happened.
Well, again, it's a double standard in justice because if you were the congressman and somebody's seeing you driving, they turn their head when you're not the congressman. Yeah, if you're not the congressman.
Yeah, I'm not. I
they want to pull you over and arrest you.
I deserved being arrested. I deserved everything that happened. I recognize that, and again, I look at it now and say, Jesus, it saved my life.
Did you ever think how ironic it was, John, that you get the 2 DWIs, but at one time you were head of the Stop DWI program?
Hypocritical, right?
Is it?
Here's an interesting story. I was at a gas station pumping gas, and the trooper that arrested me the second time was there, and I had been sober about a year. And he was with his family. They were in the car. He was pumping gas at a pump net near me, and he looked at me, and he knew who I was, and I knew who he was. And I looked at him and walked over to him and said, I just want, and he had this look of like, oh, what's this about, when I was coming at him. And I said, I just want to tell you thank you, because you probably saved my life. And just turned, and he had this sort of shocked look on his face, but it's true. And now I represent some people who get DW or get arrested. Sometimes it's not DWIs, it's other crimes, but I can recognize that they are people in crisis. And my advice to them isn't just the legal advice, although the legal advice supersedes, because that's my job, my responsibility. But I also have a way of sort of steering them towards things that might be better behaviors.
Yeah.
It might save their lives.
I think my whole ordeal taught me that, I was never one to quickly rush to judgment against anybody. I know so many people over my life like you, and you hear stories and they're not true, and you're sitting at a diner and they're talking about a friend of yours, and what they're talking about is total bullshit.
Bullshit. Right.
But I've learned to just take it as a grain of salt, because the things they said about me were just nonstop every day. How can a small mayor of a city of host 16,000 people make the number one story in the Times Union 2 years in a row? I said, it's not possible. Then the other 50 stories, and today.
Well, they want those folks over there tend to be very subjective and very personal in their.
They don't write. They're not journalists. They're just rotten pricks that just want to destroy your life.
And once you get on their ledger, they don't want to let you go. Years later, they were still writing about things that had happened, the negative things that had happened to me 5, 6, 7 years later.
Watch this podcast, they'll be writing something tomorrow.
Yeah, right.
But at this point in your life, you're comfortable with who you are. You know your own truth. You know whether you did something wrong, you didn't do something wrong. Did you do something that you didn't know? Was it the wrong thing, the right thing? Campaign finance stuff, I'm watching TV all the time. Nobody even knows what the hell you can and cannot do. And therefore, if they're after you, they just say, oh, you can't do that, when 60 other people have been told they could. I remember when Joe Bruno bought a pool cover for his pool, and he said, well, I got to keep the water warm so when the lobbyists come over, they're not freezing. And they said, oh yeah, you can do that, right? So who the hell knows? If they don't like you, they're after you. They beat
none of it matters. Listen,
none of it matters.
I don't know about you, but I know about me, and I got involved in public service because I wanted to help people.
Yeah.
And there were various things that accomplishments that I had along the way that I was very proud of, that made what I was doing very fulfilling.
Yeah.
And I tell the story of one of a fairly well-known individual from this area who had a rare blood cancer that had metastasized on him, and there was a experimental drug out that the FDA and the CDC had released in limited fashion to all the big cities. So Albany didn't get it. And I was on the appropriations committee. And I called the head of the CDC and the FDA up and said, hey, your budget's coming up in a couple of weeks. I'm a no vote on this, and this, unless you do this. You need to get that drug to Albany Med Hospital pronto. And they did. And I remember going to this fella's wake, and his widow said to me, was very grateful and very happy to see me, and said, you gave us 6 months more of his life, and we're really appreciative of it. That kind of stuff was the stuff that you want to do, and that was just one individual. There were plenty of those kinds of examples on a broader scale that really made all the crap that you took worth it.
I've learned a long time ago that I can judge somebody who's really working hard, trying to do the right thing. Look, and I was a professional firefighter for 26 years, right?
Yeah.
I was blessed enough to save people and pull them out of burning buildings, and I was blessed to be part of helping young families struggling for Christmas with our Christmas program. And those are the things that I'm really proud of. But I can tell a man or a woman who is there trying to get things done because they speak up, they rock the boat, they question authority, And I sit back now and say, I hope they get at least 5 or 6 years to get some good stuff done before somebody comes after them. Because that's the kind of people you need in government, you know?
Yeah.
And you were one of those people, and you did a great job. So you had this real successful career, and then you had some bumps in the road, and you had some tough times, a lot of bad things said about a good man. But here we are now at a whole different point in your life, John, right? And here's the resurrection of a guy who had from the top to the bottom and comes back. You're a very successful lawyer. You have a beautiful family. You're on the Truth, Lies, and Political Bullshit podcast. I mean, what could be better than what could be better than all that? But
yeah, I think in my obit.
I want it on the top line. I don't want to be at the bottom. But I mean, hey, look it for the people watching this show, for the people who don't know you, from the people who just heard all the stories about you that they really don't know, because that's what people do. They listen to things and they draw judgment. I think people can now just take a moment to watch this podcast and know that you've been a good man, that you've done great things, you overcame addiction, you've resurrected your career. You take good care of your family, and what else can anybody ask for in this life, right? If you live it right, one life is long enough, and I think we're all living it now in a different perspective than politics, where you get caught and sucked up.
Yeah, I've
living
come
now
to
for our families, right?
Yeah, I've come to the place that I've recognized my family and friends are really what it's all about, the meaning of life kind of thing. And subsequent to that, and getting sober was important because I'm part of a fellowship now. I have friends, some of them old that I grew up with, some of them new people that I didn't really know, but on a spiritual level are deeper friends to me, like real friends to me, than anybody I really would have considered my friend when I was at the height of the game. Some of those folks stayed around, but a lot of people didn't. And I'm more secure, happier, more humble for it.
You're better for it, right?
Yeah, I'm really grateful.
Yeah.
I tell that to my kids all the time when things are tough for them, and they're complaining about whatever is bothering them. I said, do a gratitude list. Look at what you're grateful for. Look at all the things we got. Because you could have grown up in Bangladesh, for Christ's sake.
I say that all the time, right?
and worried about having food and water.
No matter how bad we have it, John, we have it far better than so many other people. No matter how many times you're knocked down, you just got to keep getting up. No matter what people say about you, if they're trying to knock you down and hurt you, you got to say a prayer for them, because they're just weak people, right?
Right.
And I tell that to my kids, just, find something you love, and you never have to work a day in your life. Give it 110%. Don't stop. Don't stop dreaming. Don't stop learning. Don't stop, anything that,
Good advice.
That you love, right? And hopefully that advice carries on. They're a pain in the ass, but
Nothing's perfect.
Hopefully one day they wake up and go, holy shit, the last 6 months my father became smarter than I ever knew he could be.
That does happen, by the way. I've had that happen with a couple of my older kids.
Yeah.
You're not as dumb as I thought you were.
Yeah, all of a sudden they wake up and go, holy shit, he got smart last week. But hey, I'm glad your family is doing well. I just need to know a couple things, right? Just tell me, because everybody wants to know. Give me a few assholes in Congress that you'd really like to call out. I mean, I know there's a lot of them.
You would ask a question like that.
I got to close with some good stuff.
I was never a big Schumer fan. In fact, there was this time that we did a joint press conference up here, and Judy Sanders, God rest her soul, was the reporter who asked the question, because Dicker had put it in his column that I had said that Chuck was infamous for taking credit for other people's work. He had basically tried to steal a piece of work that I had done for RPI and make it his. And it's true to this day. Hillary takes credit for the $20 billion to rebuild Ground Zero. I'm the guy who negotiated that thing on the Appropriations Committee, but no one's going to want to hear that or believe that.
Well, she didn't take credit for Benghazi, did she?
Yeah,
She'll take credit for $20 million, but
But yeah, and then Jerry Nadler was always a difficult person for me to understand and deal with, and Maxine Waters was not on the top of my list. And there were a few Republicans that I looked at, and Paul Ryan was once my friend, and I look at him now and just don't know what he's about other than the establishment and power.
Yeah, he doesn't know what he's about. And where is he now, right? I mean, at the end of the day, sometimes you get too big for your britches.
Well, he came. He's one of those guys that came to Washington with a family with means, not like you and I. His family owned a major business, and so he was taken care of no matter what he did.
Yeah,
so.
Right. Well, hey, if you look at it, I think, and I haven't looked in a couple years, but I was always intrigued by the wealth of people who are in Congress or senators. I mean, from a few $1 million to $450 million. There's no poor people in the federal government.
Very few.
And most of them, if they go in poor, leave very rich. And you try to.
Yeah, how's that happen? I'm an idiot because I look at Obama and that crew, and they came from pretty humble means themselves, and now they are so wealthy.
Yeah.
And I know that he became president of the United States, and that's certainly nothing that I came close to. But wow,
wow is a good word.
And how that's not ever questioned or investigated or explored. The Clintons, another group.
Yeah, the Clintons weren't rich. Biden has been on a public payroll his whole life with his wife. They got millions and millions and millions of dollars. That doesn't happen by accident, right? The internal workings of politics are always going to be dirty. The influence that you have over money is always going to be a path to wealth. It's just something you have to accept, and that's why people will do anything at any cost to stay in power, because it's not just about being able to help
that's what
people.
It is. It is about power and control. Yeah. And I've come to realize that, and frankly, it was back in the day as well, but it was mitigated to some degree because I think you had to some degree an independent news medium that would different sources follow and cover things that they don't do now, would ask questions that they don't ask now, and they've sort of fallen into a one-party state, which is scary. I mean, we need that balance, that tug of war.
Well, so they would treat everybody kind of semi-equally, at least 60-40%. Today, it's just a one-sided media. I think they're the root to all evil. They have divided this country. They have put more pressure on race relations in this country. They all want you to believe that all these bad things are happening when they really ain't. But they want you to believe that, because if they believe it and there's a story and they come around
and
on
it fits an agenda.
That's right. And then they fix the problem. You go, I'm voting for him because of this or that or this. The reality is, any of those people that do that, you should simply say very quickly, don't vote for that son of a bitch, because they're all smoke and mirrors. And that's why term limits should come into play, because if you don't, they're just going to keep gerrymandering and keeping themselves in power for the rest of their lives. But hey, John, that's all for another story. I want to.
Yeah, I got to come back on. I got other things I could tell you.
Yeah, well, I'd certainly love to have you back.
We got to year 2000.
Well, the good part is that we at least got the thing working now, so it doesn't take 4 days to get an hour's worth of thing. But I really want to wish you and your family a Merry Christmas. You know, I'm always praying for you. If there's anything that we could do at Truth, Lies, and Political Bullshit, you know, we're here to help you. And I really had a good time. It's an interesting story, and you got a lot of courage to share your story from the rise, the fall, and the resurrection of a U.S. congressman. So, John, we'll talk to you really soon, and hang in there, buddy.
Thank you, Sean.
Take care. Truth, Lies, and Political Bullshit. Sick and tired of all the stuffy podcasts? We wanted to create something real, something raw, where there are no limits. Sean has held political office for 20 years, been a professional firefighter, and been through hell and back. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. See you next time on Truth, Lies, and Political Bullshit.